Welcome back to the Wish House. I'm Cris Spinner, and we're going to begin today with a little trip down memory lane. I wasn't much of a defiant child. Even in adolescence, I was really kind of a goody two-shoes. I was a big rule follower. Definitely a Jan Brady, not cool enough to be Marcia. Truth be told, I'm still a bit of a rule follower today. Maybe not so much a goody two-shoes, but suffice to say, up until about 16, I really was a completely obedient kid, very terrified of doing something that my parents told me not to do. I often say I never realized there were options. My mom and dad would say, come in at a certain time, and I would be home by then. My mom and dad would say, don't do that, and I wouldn't do it. Unlike my brother, who knew he had options. He did what he wanted, when he wanted, how he wanted. And in fact, I remember a funny story when we were teens. My father must have told my brother to come home at 10. And my brother was gone for 2 days, which was not unusual. He had friends and they basically stayed over at each other's houses or whatever. Let me just tell you, my brother Frank is his own podcast. But I remember my brother coming through the door 2 days later. And I said, you're going to be in so much trouble because Daddy said you had to be home by 10 and it's been 2 days. And he looked at the clock and he said, it's 10. Daddy didn't specify what day. So you see, my brother knew there were options and defiance ran through his veins, but not mine. I do remember once my mom telling me that I couldn't date the percussion player in the school band. And I have to laugh at the word date as if that was even a possibility. I wasn't dating at 14, but I thought there might be a possibility. And I remember her telling me that. And I remember slamming the door and screaming that she was ruining my life. But in retrospect, I think that turned out to be one of her better calls. And I tell you all this because we are now headed into a new stage in the Anthony story, where my experience with defiance wasn't that strong. So when I first started to see behaviors, as we call them, when Anthony first had a behavior, I saw it as a typical adolescent's defiance. I guess I had become so used to Anthony presenting with a good amount of typical emotions, albeit under the umbrella of a profoundly autistic child. I thought that when I started to see the behaviors, I was encountering adolescent defiance. And at first, I liked it because I felt he was maturing in a very typical way. Why shouldn't he be upset over a decision he didn't like? I thought his decision-making skills were coming to the forefront, and I felt good about the occasional door slam or the occasional throwing of himself on the bed when something didn't go his way. But little did I know this was going to be the beginning of a brand new chapter, a new chapter under which I could have written a novel about. I always say 2010 was the calm before the storm. 2010 was such a great year for us. In fact, I made a Christmas card that year, a picture Christmas card showing all of our great highlights of 2010. I remember having a glass of Chardonnay and calling my friend Janine over Christmas break and having a great talk with her in the kitchen. There I was standing with my glass and I was playing Barbra Streisand's Broadway Songs CD. And I remember Something's Coming was playing when I hung up. And I just felt very happy in that moment. Yet it kind of also felt like things were just a little too good. I don't know, is it like the Italian, nothing can stay good for too long kind of thing? I don't know. But I do remember feeling like this was a calm before a storm. But we went plunging into 2011, a year that would change our lives in really ways I never saw coming. It is the most pivotal year of our lives. So let me tell you what was happening in 2011. Right after New Year's, I felt as if Anthony was changing. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but he seemed a lot more anxiety-ridden. Everything seemed to be a little more high drama than it had usually been. His temper was getting shorter. His patience level was getting shorter. He seemed to be having little episodes or behaviors for just about everything. Of course, they started noticing it at school as well. He started to bang on tables, knock things over. He wasn't his amiable self. And he started doing something that was completely foreign to me. He started binge eating. And I don't mean just eating a little extra of things that he liked. No, this wasn't a teenage young man who suddenly could eat an entire bag of family-sized Doritos. No, this was something very different. I was always able to keep snacks in the cupboard, and we had a line of them on the refrigerator, on the top of the refrigerator. And Anthony was always great about helping himself and taking an instruction of one bowl only, or don't eat too much, it's going to spoil your dinner kind of thing. But now Anthony would come home and begin eating everything in sight. And there was no rhyme or reason. He would go from one bag to the next. And if I tried to stop him, he would have a meltdown. And eventually those meltdowns got worse. He also didn't care what he ate. I remember once I was cooking and there was some rice, raw rice, left over in a measuring cup. And he started to eat that with the wooden spoon that I left inside of that measuring cup. He drank a quart of half and half once and got sick. If I didn't have second portions readily available for his meals, he would have a meltdown. And trust me, when I say these meltdowns were not just a little yelling, by the end of January, Anthony was tipping over furniture, yelling so loud he could wake the dead, and then lunging at me. Something I could never come to grips with, because prior to this, that never happened. This was not my boy. This was not my son. That was not my Anthony. He began ruminating on everything, especially his beloved carousels. He wanted to spend hours at the computer designing and redesigning. And if something didn't work, or he couldn't get into a program quickly, or the printer didn't have enough paper in it, it was a nightmare scenario. He would walk around the house following me and asking questions for hours. All sorts of abstract things that I didn't know the answer to. And if I didn't have the answer, there was hell to pay. And I was just trying to manage all of it. I was just trying to contain all of it, working with his psychiatrist, adjusting his medications, working with his therapists and teachers at school. But things were careening out of control, out of all control. There were days it slowed down a bit, and we were able to have a couple outings that I remember distinctly. The first one was his friend Allie's Sweet 16 birthday party. That was a huge, big event, a very big formal party. And when I look back, I can't even believe I took him to that. But for some reason, he did well. Even with the loud music and the flashing lights and all of the noise, he did well. We had an early 16th birthday party for him at my family's in Connecticut. And for some reason, he held it together for that as well. It was a simple home party, but there was more than the usual suspects there. I also remember that on the way home from that weekend, we stopped at a little fast food spot in Brewster, Connecticut called the Red Rooster. It was a favorite, but he was agitated with the line, and I was very nervous, but we worked through it. And I remember after the Red Rooster, we didn't go out much together alone anymore. I began having to keep my non-perishable food in the trunk of my car. And I began masking things in our refrigerator because the binge eating had no rhyme, no reason. It was off the charts. He never went near the half and half containers after he drank it and got sick. So I would buy tons of those half and half containers, rinse them all out, and put other beverages in them. He never was interested in going for the uncooked microwave bacon. So I bought tons of those boxes as well, emptied the bacon from them, and I used them to contain cold cuts or leftover chicken cutlets, things that I didn't want him to know we had, because he would just open the refrigerator and eat and eat and eat. I often say, as I'm creating the narrative and story for these podcasts, that I could go on for hours about just about everything. And this is one of those moments. I could really talk about this time in our journey for the next 3 hours solid. But of course, for this podcast, in the interest of time, I'm condensing. But I wouldn't want to give you who are listening the idea that this was a quick and easy time to navigate. 24 hours of every single day was like a decade, and it just kept escalating. We couldn't go out, only to take rides in the car. And I was terrified because my beautiful, amiable, wonderful young man had turned into someone I almost didn't recognize. And my heart was breaking every minute of every day because I didn't know what to do. I have to say, it is the craziest of dynamics when you're the parent of an autistic child in crisis, because our kids really are pure souls. My son is a pure soul. He didn't mean to cause harm or to cause fear. He didn't mean to strike out at me. He didn't mean to have these behaviors. None of it was in his control. But once the flame was lit, there was no turning back. He was completely emotionally dysregulated. And as the mom and as a parent who loves their child more than anything in the world, who would give their last breath for that child, you have an odd mix of fear and love at the same time. It's unnatural to the human spirit to want to run towards something that is potentially harmful to you. But that's what you want to do. You want to run toward and hug and fix and love. But you're met with what seems to be uncontrollable resistance and anger. And you could find yourself in danger. Anthony was in crisis. And I was to find out that that crisis occurs in many, many autistic adolescents, especially boys. Little by little, I had to tell the little community family that we had built up over all of these years, our wonderful caregivers, that they couldn't be watching Anthony after school anymore. It was, as I called it, the trail of tears, because nobody wanted to leave our home. These young men and women had grown to love Anthony, and most had been with him since he was 7 or 8, but it wasn't safe. I also had a gal, Angela, who to this day we refer to as Angela, who refused to leave us, but encountered a couple of incidences that she wasn't prepared to handle as well that I had to rush home for. I had a very big network of autism moms, and many of them had situations like this in their lives as well. Their kids were a little bit older than Anthony. They had already gone through it. And as I had watched them go through similar situations, I never thought this was going to be my story. But I reached out to them, and every one of them gave me the same advice and scenario. They told me that eventually Anthony was more than likely going to have to spend a few weeks in a hospital to get his medications titrated, which is a kind of a rebalance of medications. And those 2 weeks would also offer doctors, psychologists, therapists time to evaluate Anthony and devise a new set of programming before he could come back home. I was terrified of this prospect. Anthony and I had not ever been separated, maybe a night or two for an overnight in his summer day camp. But I was connected to all of my friends who were working at the camp